John Joseph Gotti Jr., Italian. Modifier letter vertical line, Latin small letter script G, Latin small letter open O T, October 27, 1940, June 10, 2002 was an American gangster who became boss of the Gambino crime family in New York City. Gotti and his brothers grew up in poverty and turned to a life of crime at an early age. Gotti quickly became one of the crime family's biggest earners and a protege of Gambino family under boss Aniello Dela Cruz, operating out of the Ozone Park neighborhood of Queens. Early in his criminal career and following the FBI's indictment of members of Gotti's crew for selling narcotics, Gotti began to fear that he and his brother would be killed by Gambino boss Paul Castellano for selling drugs. As this fear continued to grow, and amidst growing dissent over the leadership of the crime family, Gotti organized the murder of Castellano in December 1985 and took over the family shortly thereafter, leaving Gotti as the boss of what has been described as America's most powerful crime syndicate, and one that made hundreds of millions of dollars a year from racketeering, hijacking, loan sharking, drug trafficking, bookmaking, prostitution, extortion, pornography, illegal gambling and other criminal activities. At his peak, Gotti was one of the most powerful and dangerous crime bosses in the United States. During his era he became widely known for his outspoken personality and flamboyant style, which gained him favor with some of the general public. While his peers avoided attracting attention, especially from the media, Gotti became known as the Dapper Don for his expensive clothes and personality in front of news cameras. He was later given the nickname, the Teflon Don, after 3 high-profile trials in the 1980s resulted in his acquittal, though it was later revealed that the trials had been tainted by jury tampering, juror misconduct, and witness intimidation. Law enforcement authorities continue gathering evidence against Gotti that helped lead to his downfall. According to Sammy Gravano, Gotti earned between $5 to $20 million per year during his tenure as Gambino boss. Gotti as under boss Salvatore, Sammy the Bull Gravano aided the FBI in finally convicting Gotti. In 1991, Gravano agreed to turn state's evidence and testify for the prosecution against Gotti after hearing the boss making several disparaging remarks about Gravano on a wiretap that implicated them both in several murders. In 1992, Gotti was convicted of 5 murders: conspiracy to commit murder, racketeering, obstruction of justice, tax evasion, illegal gambling, extortion, and loan sharking. He was sentenced to life in prison without parole and was transferred to United States Penitentiary, Marion in southern Illinois. According to former Lucchese crime family boss Anthony "Gaspipe" Casso, what John Gotti did was the beginning of the end of Cosa Nostra. While in prison, Gotti died of throat cancer on June 10, 2002, at the United States Medical Center for Federal Prisoners in Springfield, Missouri. Early life. Gotti was born in the Bronx, New York, on October 27, 1940. He was the 5th of the 13 children. 2 had died at birth of John Joseph Gotti Sr. and Filomena Fanny DiCarlo. His parents were born in New York, but it is presumed that their parents were from San Giuseppe Vesuviano, in the province of Naples, Italy, where his parents were married and lived for some time. Gotti was one of 5 brothers who became made men in the Gambino crime family. Eugene Gotti was initiated before John due to John's incarceration. Peter Gotti was initiated under John's leadership in 1988. And Richard V. Gotti was identified as a Cooper regime made member who heads a crew of soldiers and has major social status by 2002. The 5th, Vincent, was initiated in 2002. By the age of 12, the Gottis settled in East New York, Brooklyn, where he grew up in poverty alongside his brothers. His father worked irregularly as a day laborer. As an adult, Gotti came to resent his father for being unable to provide for his family. In school, he had a history of truancy and bullying other students, and ultimately dropped out of Franklin K. Lane High School at the age of Gotti was involved in street gangs associated with New York City mafiosi from the age of 12. When he was 14, he was attempting to steal a cement mixer from a construction site when it fell, crushing his toes. This injury left him with a permanent limp. After leaving school, he devoted himself to working with the Mafia-associated Fulton Rockaway Boys gang, where he met and befriended fellow future Gambino mobsters Angelo Ruggiero and Wilfred Willie Boy Johnson. Gotti met his future wife, Victoria DiGiorgio, who is half Italian and half Russian, at a bar in 1958. The couple were married on March 6, 1962. They had 5 children: Angela, Victoria, John Jr., Frank D. 1980, and Peter. Gotti attempted to work legitimately in 1962 as a presser in a coat factory and as an assistant truck driver. However, he could not stay crime-free and, by 1966, had been jailed twice. Gambino crime family. Associate as early as his teens, Gotti was running errands for Carmine Fatico, a capo in the Gambino family, then known as the Anastasia family under the leadership of boss Albert Anastasia. Gotti carried out truck hijackings at Idlewild Airport, subsequently renamed John F. Kennedy International Airport, together with his brother Gene and friend Ruggiero. During this time, Gotti befriended fellow mob hijacker and future Bonanno family boss Joseph Mazzino, and he was given the nicknames Black John and Crazy Horse. It was around this time that Gotti met his mentor and Gambino underboss Aniello Neil Delacruz. Delacruz regaled Gotti with tales of past mafia glories under Anastasia, leading Gotti to adopt Anastasia as his role model. In February 1968, United Airlines employees identified Gotti as the man who had signed for stolen merchandise. The FBI arrested him for the United hijacking soon after. Gotti was arrested a third time for hijacking while out on bail 2 months later, this time for stealing a load of cigarettes worth $50,000 on the New Jersey Turnpike. Later that year, Gotti pleaded guilty to the Northwest Airlines hijacking and was sentenced to 3 years at Lewisburg Federal Penitentiary. Prosecutors dropped the charges for the cigarette hijacking. Gotti also pleaded guilty to the United hijacking and spent less than 3 years at Lewisburg. Gotti and Ruggiero were paroled in 1972 and returned to their old crew at the Bergen Hunt and Fish Club, still working under Fatico. Gotti was transferred to management of the Bergen crew's illegal gambling, where he proved himself to be an effective enforcer. Fatico was indicted on loan sharking charges in 1972. As a condition of his release, he could not associate with known felons. Gotti was not yet a made man in the Mafia due to the membership books having been closed since 1957 due to the Apalachin meeting, but Fatico named him acting capo of the Bergen crew soon after he was paroled. In this new role, Gotti frequently traveled to Delacruz's headquarters at the Rave Night Social Club to brief the underboss on the crew's activities. Delacruz had already taken a liking to Gotti, and the two became even closer during this time. The two were very similar. Both had strong violent streaks, cursed a lot, and were heavy gamblers. After Manuel Gambino, nephew to boss Carlo Gambino, was kidnapped and murdered in 1973, Gotti was assigned to the hit team alongside Ruggiero and Ralph Gallioni in search for the main suspect, gangster James McBratney. The team botched their attempt to abduct McBratney at a Staten Island bar, and Gallioni shot McBratney dead when his accomplices managed to restrain him. Gotti was identified by eyewitnesses and by a police insider, and so he was arrested for the killing in June 1974. He was able to strike a plea bargain, however, with the help of attorney Roy Cohen, and received a 4-year sentence for attempted manslaughter for his part in the hit. After Gotti's death, he was also identified by Mazzino as the killer of Vito Borelli, a Gambino associate killed in 1975 for insulting then-acting boss Paul Castellano. Captain. On October 15, 1976, Carlo Gambino died at home of natural causes. Against expectations, He had appointed Castellano to succeed him over his underboss Dela Cruz. Gambino appeared to believe that his crime family would benefit from Castellano's focus on white-collar businesses. Dela Cruz, at the time, was in prison for tax evasion and was unable to contest Castellano's succession. Castellano's succession was confirmed at a meeting on November 24, with Dela Cruz present. Castellano arranged for Dela Cruz to remain as underboss while directly running traditional Cosa Nostra activities such as extortion, robbery, and loan sharking. While Dela Cruz accepted Castellano's succession, the deal effectively split the Gambino family into two rival factions. In 1976, the membership books were reportedly reopened. Gotti was released in July 1977. After 2 years imprisonment, he was subsequently initiated as a made man into the Gambino family, now under the command of Castellano, and immediately promoted to replace Fatico as capo of the Bergen crew. He and his crew reported directly to Dela Cruz as part of the concessions given by Castellano to keep Dela Cruz as underboss, and Gotti was regarded as Dela Cruz's protege. Under Gotti, the crew were Dela Cruz's biggest earners. Besides his cut of his subordinates' earnings, Gotti ran his own loan sharking operation and held a no-show job as a plumbing supply salesman. Unconfirmed allegations by FBI informants in the Bergen Hunt and Fish Club claimed that Gotti also financed drug deals. Gotti tried to keep most of his family uninvolved with his life of crime, with the exception of his son John Angelo Gotti, who was a mob associate by 1982. In December 1978, Gotti assisted in the largest unrecovered cash robbery in history, the infamous Lufthansa heist at Kennedy Airport. Gotti had made arrangements for the getaway van to be crushed and bailed at a scrapyard in Brooklyn. Gotti's cut of the heist was a reported $200,000. The driver of the van failed to follow orders. Rather than driving the vehicle to the scrapyard, he parked it near a fire hydrant and went to sleep at his girlfriend's apartment. The NYPD recovered the van and lifted the fingerprints of several perpetrators of the robbery, helping to unravel the heist. On March 18, 1980, Gotti's youngest son, 12-year-old Frank Gotti, was run over and killed on a family friend's minibike by a neighbor named John Favara. Frank's death was ruled an accident, but Favara subsequently received death threats and was attacked by Victoria with a baseball bat when he visited the Gottis to apologize. On July 28, 1980, he was abducted and disappeared, presumed murdered. The Gottis were on vacation in Florida at the time, but Gotti is still presumed to have ordered the killing. Richard Kuklinski alleged that he carried out dozens of murders on behalf of Gambino soldier Roy DiMeo, including being hired by Gotti to kidnap, torture and murder Favara. Mob expert Jerry Capesi dismissed Kuklinski's claims as mostly demented ramblings. Gotti was indicted on 2 occasions in his last 2 years as the Bergen capo, with both cases coming to trial after his ascension to boss of the Gambinos. In September 1984, Gotti had an altercation with refrigerator mechanic Romuald Piesig, and was subsequently charged with assault and robbery. In 1985, he was indicted alongside Dela Cruz and several Bergen crew members in a racketeering case by Assistant U.S. Attorney Diane Jackalone. The indictment revealed that Gotti's friend and co-defendant Wilfred "Willie Boy" Johnson had been an FBI informant. Taking over the Gambino family, Gotti rapidly became dissatisfied with Castellano's leadership, regarding the new boss as being too isolated and greedy. Like other members of the family, Gotti also personally disliked Castellano. The boss lacked street credibility, and those who had paid their dues running street-level jobs did not respect him. Gotti also had an economic interest. He had a running beef with Castellano on the split Gotti took from hijackings at Kennedy Airport. Gotti was also rumored to be expanding into drug dealing, a lucrative trade Castellano had banned. In August 1983, Ruggiero and Gene Gotti were arrested for dealing heroin, based primarily on recordings from a bug in Ruggiero's house. Castellano, who had banned made men from his family from dealing drugs under threat of death, demanded transcripts of the tapes, and, when Ruggiero refused, threatened to demote Gotti. In 1984, Castellano was arrested and indicted in a RICO case for the crimes of Gambino hitman Roy DiMeo's crew. The following year, he received a second indictment for his role in the Mafia's commission. Facing life imprisonment for either case, Castellano arranged for Gotti to serve as an acting boss alongside Thomas Bilotti, Castellano's favored capo, and Thomas Gambino in his absence. Gotti, meanwhile, began conspiring with fellow disgruntled capos Frank DeSico and Joe Pine, Arm 1 and soldiers Sammy Gravano and Robert D.B. DiBernardo, collectively dubbed the Fist by themselves, to overthrow Castellano, insisting despite the boss inaction that Castellano would eventually try to kill him. Armani's support was critical. As a respected old-timer who dated back to the family's founder, Vincent Mangano, he would lend needed credibility to the conspirators' cause. It has long been a rule in the Mafia that a boss could only be killed with the approval of a majority of the commission. Indeed, Gotti's planned hit would have been the first unsanctioned hit on a boss since Frank Costello was nearly killed in 1957. Gotti knew that it would be too risky to solicit support from the other four bosses, since they had long-standing ties to Castellano. To get around this, he got the support of several important figures of his generation in the Lucchese, Colombo and Bonanno families. He did not consider approaching the Genovese family. Castellano's ties with Genovese boss Vincent Chen Gigante were so close that any overture to a Genovese soldier would have been a tip-off. However, Gotti could also count on the complicity of Gambino consigliere Joseph N. Gallo. After Delacroce died of cancer on December 2, 1985, Castellano revised his succession plan, appointing Bilotti as underboss to Thomas Gambino as the sole acting boss, while making plans to break up Gotti's crew. Infuriated by this, and Castellano's refusal to attend Delacroce's wake, Gotti resolved to kill his boss. When DeSico tipped Gotti off that he would be having a meeting with Castellano and several other Gambino mobsters at Sparks Steakhouse on December 16, 1985, Gotti chose to take the opportunity. The evening of the meeting, when the boss and underboss arrived, they were ambushed and shot dead by assassins under Gotti's command. Gotti watched the hit from his car with Gravano. Several days after the murder, Gotti was named to a three-man committee to temporarily run the family pending the election of a new boss, along with Gallo and DeSico. It was also announced that an internal investigation into Castellano's murder was underway. However, it was an open secret that Gotti was acting boss in all but name, and nearly all of the family's capos knew he had been the one behind the hit. He was formally acclaimed as the new boss of the Gambino family at a meeting of 20 capos held on January 15, 1986. He appointed DeSico as the new underboss while retaining Gallo as consigliere. Crime boss identified as both Castellano's likely murderer and his successor, Gotti rose to fame throughout 1986. At the time of his takeover, the Gambino family was regarded as the most powerful American mafia family, with an annual income of $500 million. In the book Underboss, Gravano estimated that Gotti himself had an annual income of not less than $5 million during his years as boss, and more likely between $10 and $12 million. To protect himself legally, Gotti banned members of the Gambino family from accepting plea bargains that acknowledged the existence of the organization. He maintained a genial public image in an attempt to play down press releases that depicted him as a ruthless mobster. He reportedly would offer coffee to FBI agents assigned to tail him. The Teflon Don Gotti's newfound fame had at least one positive effect upon the revelation of his attacker's occupation. And amid reports of intimidation by the Gambinos, Romuald Pisic decided not to testify against Gotti thanks to Bosco, the Hugo Radonjic, the head of the West Eyes in Hell's Kitchen, Manhattan. When the trial began in March 1986, Pisak testified he was unable to remember who attacked him. The case was promptly dismissed, with the New York Post summarizing the proceedings with the headline, "I forgot Gotti." It was later revealed that Gambino thugs had severed Pisak's brake lines, made threatening phone calls and stalked him before the trial. On April 13, 1986, Basico was killed when his car was bombed following a visit to Castellano loyalist James Fella. The bombing was carried out by Victor Amuso and Anthony Casso of the Lucchese family, under orders of Gigante and Lucchese boss Anthony Corallo, to avenge Castellano and Bilotti by killing their successors. Gotti also planned to visit Fella that day, but cancelled, and the bomb was detonated after a soldier who rode with Basico was mistaken for the boss. Bombs had long been banned by the Mafia out of concern that it would put innocent people in harm's way, leading the Gambinos to initially suspect that Zips, Sicilian mafiosi working in the U.S., were behind it. Zips were well known for using bombs. Following the bombing, Judge Eugene Nickerson, presiding over Gotti's racketeering trial, rescheduled to avoid a jury tainted by the resulting publicity, while Giacalone had Gotti's bail revoked due to evidence of witness intimidation in the Pisak case. From jail, Gotti ordered the murder of Robert DiBernardo by Gravano. Both DiBernardo and Ruggiero had been vying to succeed Basico until Ruggiero accused DiBernardo of challenging Gotti's leadership. When Ruggiero, also under indictment, had his bail revoked for his abrasive behavior in preliminary hearings, a frustrated Gotti instead promoted Arm to underboss. Jury selection for the racketeering case began again in August 1986, with Gotti standing trial alongside his ex-companion William "Willie Boy" Johnson, who, despite being exposed as an informant, refused to turn state's evidence. Leonard DeMaria, Tony Rampino, Nicholas Carozzo and John Carneglia. At this point, the Gambinos were able to compromise the case when George Pape hid his friendship with Radonjic and was empaneled as juror number 11. Through Radonjic, Pape contacted Gravano and agreed to sell his vote on the jury for $60,000. The trial's opening statements on September 25. Gotti's defense attorney Bruce Cutler denied the existence of the Gambino family and framed the government's entire effort as a personal vendetta. His main defense strategy during the prosecution was to attack the credibility of prosecutor Diane Giacalone's witnesses by discussing their crimes committed before their turning state's evidence. During Gotti's defense, Cutler called bank robber Matthew Traynor, a would-be prosecution witness dropped for unreliability, who testified that Giacalone offered him drugs and her panties as a masturbation aid in exchange for his testimony. Traynor's allegations would be dismissed by Judge Nickerson as wholly unbelievable after the trial, and he was subsequently convicted of perjury. Despite Cutler's defense and critiques about the prosecution's performance, according to mob writers Jerry K. Pesci and Gene Mustaine, when the jury's deliberations began, a majority were in favor of convicting Gotti. However, due to Pape's misconduct, Gotti knew from the beginning of the trial that he could do no worse than a hung jury. During deliberations, Pape held out for acquittal until the rest of the jury began to fear their own safety would be compromised. On March 13, 1987, they acquitted Gotti and his co-defendants of all charges. 5 years later, Pape was convicted of obstruction of justice for his part in the fix and sentenced to 3 years in prison. In the face of previous Mafia convictions, particularly the success of the Mafia Commission trial, Gotti's acquittal was a major upset that further added to his reputation. The American media dubbed Gotti the Teflon Don in reference to the failure of any charges to stick. Reorganization. While Gotti himself had escaped conviction, his associates were not so lucky. The other two men in the Gambino administration, underboss Arm and Consigliere Gallo, had been indicted on racketeering charges in 1986 and were both convicted in December 1987. The heroin trial of Gotti's former fellow Bergen crew members Ruggiero and Gene Gotti also commenced in June of that year. Prior to their convictions, Gotti allowed Gallo to retire and promoted Gravano in his place while slating Frank Locascio to serve as acting underboss in the event of Armani's imprisonment. The Gambinos also worked to compromise the heroin trials jury, resulting in 2 mistrials. When the terminally ill Ruggiero was severed and released in 1989, Gotti refused to contact him, blaming him for the Gambino's misfortunes. According to Gravano, Gotti also considered murdering Ruggiero, and when he finally died, "I literally had to drag him to the funeral." Beginning in January 1988, Gotti, against Gravano's advice, required his capos to meet with him at the Rave Night Social Club once a week. Regarded by Gene as an unnecessary vanity-inspired risk, and by FBI Gambino squad leader Bruce Moo as antithetical to the secret society, this move allowed FBI surveillance to record and identify much of the Gambino hierarchy. It also provided strong circumstantial evidence that Gotti was a boss. Long-standing protocol in the Mafia requires public demonstrations of loyalty to the boss. The FBI also bugged the Rave Night, but failed to produce any high-quality incriminating recordings. 1988 also saw Gotti, Gigante and new Lucchese boss Victor Amuso attending the first commission meeting since the commission trial. In 1986, future Lucchese underboss Anthony Casso had been injured in an unauthorized hit by a Gambino capo Mickey Paradiso. The following year, the FBI warned Gotti they had recorded Genovese consigliere Louis Minot discussing another hit on Gotti and his brother. To avoid a war, the leaders of the 3 families met, denied knowledge of their violence against one another, and agreed to communicate better. The bosses also agreed to allow Colombo acting boss Victor Orena to join the commission, but Gigante, wary of giving Gotti a majority by admitting another ally, blocked the re-entry of Mazzino and the Bonanos. Gotti was nevertheless able to take control of the New Jersey DeCavalcante crime family in 1988. According to the DeCavalcante capo-turned-informant Anthony Rotondo, Gotti attended his father's wake with numerous other Gambino mobsters in a show of force and forced boss John Riggi to agree to run his family on the Gambino's behalf. The DeCavalcantes remained in the Gambino's sphere of influence until Gotti's imprisonment. Gotti's son, John Gotti Jr., was initiated into the Gambino family on Christmas Eve 1988. According to fellow mobster Michael DeLeonardo, initiated in the same night, Gravano held the ceremony to keep Gotti from being accused of nepotism. John Jr. was promptly promoted to capo. Assault acquittal. On the evening of January 23, 1989, Gotti was arrested outside the Rave Night and charged with ordering the 1986 assault of labor union official John O'Connor. O'Connor, a leader in the United Brotherhood of Carpenters and Joiners of America Local 608 who was later convicted of racketeering himself, was believed to have ordered an attack on a Gambino-associated restaurant that had snubbed the union and was subsequently shot and wounded by the Wistas. To link Gotti to the case, state prosecutors had a recording of Gotti discussing O'Connor and denouncing his intention to bust him up, and the testimony of Wista's gangster James McElroy. Gotti was released on $100,000 bail, and was later acquitted at trial. It later emerged, however, that FBI bugs had apparently caught Gotti discussing plans to fix the jury as he had in the 1986-87 racketeering case. However, to the outrage of Manhattan District Attorney Robert Morgenthau and State Organized Crime Task Force Chief Ronald Goldstock, the FBI and federal prosecutors chose not to reveal this information to them. Morgenthau later said that had he known about these bugged conversations, he would have asked for a mistrial. 1992 conviction. On December 11, 1990, FBI agents and NYPD detectives raided the Rave Night, arresting Gotti, Gravano and Frank Locascio. In the back of the police car, Gotti remarked, "I bet you 3-1 I beat this." Federal prosecutors charged Gotti, in this new racketeering case, with 5 murders: Castellano, Bellotti, DiBernardo, Liborio Milito and Louis Di Bono. conspiracy to murder Gaetano Corky Vastola, loan sharking, illegal gambling, obstruction of justice, bribery and tax evasion. Based on tapes from FBI bugs played at pre-trial hearings, the Gambino administration was denied bail. At the same time, attorneys Cutler and Gerald Shargil were disqualified from defending Gotti and Gravano after prosecutors successfully contended they were part of the evidence and thus liable to be called as witnesses. Prosecutors argued that Cutler and Shargil not only knew about potential criminal activity, but had worked as in-house counsel for the Gambino family. Gotti subsequently hired Albert Krieger, a Miami attorney who had worked with Joseph Bonanno, to replace Cutler. The tapes also created a rift between Gotti and Gravano, showing the Gambino boss describing his newly appointed underboss as too greedy and attempting to frame Gravano as the main force behind the murders of DiBernardo, Melito and DiBono. Gotti's attempt at reconciliation failed, leaving Gravano disillusioned with the mob and doubtful on his chances of winning his case without Shargil, his former attorney. Gravano ultimately opted to turn state's evidence, formally agreeing to testify on November 13, 1991. Gotti and Locascio were tried in the U.S. District Court for the Eastern District of New York before District Judge Leo Glasser. Jury selection began in January 1992 with an anonymous jury and, for the first time in a Brooklyn federal case, fully sequestered during the trial due to Gotti's reputation for jury tampering. The trial commenced with the prosecution's opening statements on February 12. Prosecutors Andrew Maloney and John Gleason began their case by playing tapes showing Gotti discussing Gambino family business, including murders he approved, and confirming the animosity between Gotti and Castellano to establish the former's motive to kill his boss. After calling an eyewitness of the Sparks hit who identified Carneglia as one of the men who shot Bellotti, they then brought Gravano to testify on March 2. On the stand, Gravano confirmed Gotti's place in the structure of the Gambino family and described in detail the conspiracy to assassinate Castellano, giving a full description of the hit and its aftermath. Gravano confessed to 19 murders, implicating Gotti in 4 of them. Krieger, and Locaccio's attorney, Anthony Cardinale, proved unable to shake Gravano during cross-examination. After additional testimony and tapes, the government rested its case on March 2. 4.5 of Krieger and Cardinale's intended 6 witnesses were ruled irrelevant or extraneous, leaving only Gotti's tax attorney Murray Appleman to testify on his behalf. The defense also attempted unsuccessfully to have a mistrial declared based on Maloney's closing remarks. Gotti himself became increasingly hostile during the trial, and at one point, Glasser threatened to remove him from the courtroom. Among other outbursts, Gotti called Gravano a junkie while his attorneys sought to discuss his past steroid use, and equated the dismissal of a juror to the fixing of the 1919 World Series. On April 2, 1992, after only 14 hours of deliberation, the jury found Gotti guilty on all charges of the indictment. Locascio was found guilty on all but one. James Fox, Assistant Director in Charge or ADIC of the FBI's New York field office, announced at a press conference, "The Teflon is gone. The Don is covered with Velcro, and all the charges stuck." On June 23, 1992, Glasser sentenced both defendants to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole and a $250,000 fine. Gotti surrendered to federal authorities to serve his prison time on December 14, 1992. Incarceration and death. Gotti was incarcerated at the United States Penitentiary at Marion, Illinois. He spent the majority of his sentence in effective solitary confinement, only allowed out of his cell for 1 hour a day. His final appeal was rejected by the U.S. Supreme Court in 1994. On July 18, 1996, a fellow inmate named Walter Johnson punched Gotti in the prison recreation room, leaving him bruised and bleeding, because according to New York's Daily News, Gotti had disrespected him with a racial slur. Gotti, desiring revenge, offered Aryan Brotherhood chieftains David Sahakian and Michael McIlhenny somewhere between $40,000 and $400,000 USD to have Johnson killed. In August, McIlhenny told two Brotherhood underlings to kill Johnson if given the opportunity, according to a federal indictment charging him and 39 other gang members with murder, attempted murder and racketeering. Johnson, however, was transferred to Supermax prison in Florence, Colorado. Despite this, it was said that the Brotherhood never intended to do the hit for Gotti. Gotti is also believed to have hired the Brotherhood for another aborted hit on Locasio after learning the disgruntled acting consigliere sought to kill him. However, his family denies that Gotti ever had dealings with the notorious prison gang. Rather than associate with the Peckerwood inmates, some say he befriended many Hispanic and African American prisoners, such as a Latin king shot caller named Manny. Despite his imprisonment and pressure from the commission to stand down, Gotti asserted his prerogative to retain his title as boss until his death or retirement, with his brother Peter and his son John Jr. relaying orders on his behalf. By 1998, when he was indicted on racketeering, John Jr. was believed to be the acting boss of the family. Against his father's wishes, John Jr. pleaded guilty and was sentenced to 6 years and 5 months imprisonment in 1999. He maintains he has since left the Gambino family. Peter Gotti subsequently became acting boss and is believed to have formally succeeded his brother shortly before Gotti's death. John Jr.'s indictment brought further stress to Gotti's marriage. Victoria DiGiorgio Gotti, up to that point unaware of her son's involvement in the Mafia, blamed her husband for ruining her son's life and threatened to leave him unless he allowed John Jr. to leave the mob. In 1998, Gotti was diagnosed with throat cancer and sent to the United States Medical Center for Federal Prisoners in Springfield, Missouri, for surgery. Though the tumor was removed, the cancer was discovered to have returned 2 years later and Gotti was transferred back to Springfield, where he spent the rest of his life. Gotti's condition rapidly declined and he died on June 10, 2002, at the age of 61. The Roman Catholic Diocese of Brooklyn announced that Gotti's family would not be permitted to have a requiem mass, but allowed a memorial mass after the burial. Gotti's funeral was held in an unchurch facility. After the funeral, an estimated 300 onlookers followed the procession, which passed Gotti's Bergen Hunt and Fish Club, to the gravesite. Gotti's body was interred in a crypt next to his son, Frank, who was struck and killed by a car when he was 12 years old in 1980. Gotti's brother, Peter, was unable to attend because of his incarceration. In an apparent repudiation of Gotti's leadership and legacy, the other New York City families sent no representatives to the funeral. Numerous prosecutions triggered by Gotti's tactics left the Gambinos decimated. By the turn of the century, half of the family's made men were in prison. In popular culture, it is thought that Gotti's notoriety inspired the character Joey Zassa, portrayed by Joe Mantegna, in The Godfather Part 3. Since his conviction, Gotti has been portrayed in 5 TV movies, a documentary series and 2 theatrical films. Getting Gotti, 1994 CBS TV movie, portrayed by Anthony John Dennison. Gotti, 1996 HBO TV movie adapted from Gotti. Rise and Fall, portrayed by Armand Assante. Witness to the Mob, 1998 NBC miniseries, portrayed by Tom Sizemore. The Big Heist, 2001 Canadian-American TV movie which aired on A&E, portrayed by Steven Randazzo. Boss of Bosses, 2001 TNT TV movie adapted from the book of the same name, portrayed by Sonny Marinelli. Sinatra Club, 2010 theatrical film, portrayed by Danny Nucci. The Wannabe, 2015 film, portrayed by Joseph Saravo. Gotti, 2018 theatrical film, portrayed by John Travolta. Gotti, Godfather and Son, documentary TV miniseries, released June 9, 2018. The crime documentary series Mugshots aired an episode, John Gotti, End of the Sicilians, filmed in Sicily and Brooklyn, featuring court wiretaps and undercover footage of Gotti's mob. Referenced in American rapper 6ix9ine's song Gotti. Referenced in American rapper Kevin Gates' song John Gotti. Referenced in German rapper Kollega's song John Gotti. Referenced in Fun-Loving Criminal's song The King of New York. Referenced in several episodes of The Sopranos. Referenced in Studio 60 Season 1 Episode 11, The Christmas Show. Referenced in The Office Season 6 Episode 6, Mafia. Referenced in How I Met Your Mother Season 8 Episode 8, 12 Horny Women. References. Notes: Bloom, Howard. Gangland. How the FBI Broke the Mob. New York: Simon & Schuster, 1993. ISBN 0-671-68758-1. Capisi, Jerry and Gene Mustaine. Mob Star: The Story of John Gotti. New York: Penguin, 1988. ISBN 0-02-864416-6. Capisi, Jerry and Gene Mustaine. Gotti: Rise and Fall. New York: Onyx, 1996. ISBN 0-451-40681-8. Davis, John H. Mafia Dynasty: The Rise and Fall of the Gambino Crime Family. New York: HarperCollins, 1993. ISBN 0-06-109184-7. Moss, Peter. Underboss: Sammy the Bull Graveno's Story of Life in the Mafia. New York, NY. Harper Paperbacks, 1997. ISBN 0-06-109664-4. Rob Selwyn. 5 Families: The Rise, Decline, and Resurgence of America's Most Powerful Mafia Empires. London: Robson Books, 2006. ISBN 1-86105-952-3. External links: John Gotti. Biography.com. John Gotti: How We Made the Charges Stick. Federal Bureau of Investigation. John Gotti: Find a Grave. Retrieved July 15, 2013.